Okay, so today we're diving into something, it's always in the news, right? The Israel-Palestine conflict. And,
Right.
tons of you sent in this article by Mustafa Barghouti. He's a pretty prominent voice, I guess, over there.
Yeah, he's the leader of the Palestinian National Initiative.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously important perspective to consider. But, and we always say this, just because we're looking at this one article doesn't mean this is the truth,
Definitely not. And it's like you said, it's his perspective. He's coming from a certain place, right?
For sure. But gotta say, he doesn't pull any punches. I mean, right away, the numbers he throws out there.
Yeah.
He's saying just in the past year, over 42,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza.
Oh.
Including over 16,500 children. Like, those are, I don't even know. How do you even wrap your head around that?
It's tough, right? And honestly, to really get the impact, you got to factor in what Gaza is. That place, it's like one of the most densely packed places on Earth, right? So when conflict hits...
It's a whole different scale of devastation. And he doesn't stop at Gaza either. Barghouti, he goes on, talks about the West Bank, says 722 Palestinians killed there too. And he's directly tying this to Israel taking over land, even pointing to, I think it was peace. And they're saying this recent land grab was the biggest since the whole Oslo Accords thing. And I feel like maybe we should, for people listening, just touch on what those accords even were back then.
Oh, yeah, good point. So way back, 1993, big deal, right? Mm-hmm. The Oslo Accords were supposed to be this roadmap to peace,
right,
leading to the two-state solution everyone talks about.
Right.
But when you see land disputes still at the core of things, all these years later, kind of tells you how far off that goal still is,
Yeah, it's like they took a shot at peace, but the conflict just, I don't know, it's like it snapped back to how it was, or keeps getting worse. And this is where Barghouti's point about the timeline is kind of key, I think. He's basically saying, look, this violence, it didn't just pop out of nowhere with the Hamas attack back on October 7th last year. Like, that's not the whole story, right?
No, not at all. I mean, you can't talk about this conflict without going way back.
Yeah.
Right, 1948. When Israel was created and all the displacement that happened to the Palestinians then. And then you jump ahead to 67, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. These aren't just history book dates. They're at the root of everything that's still going on.
Yeah, it's like this, I don't know, this deep trauma baked into everyday life there. And then on top of that, you layer the Gaza blockade, which Barghouti's saying has been going on for 17 years. He calls it this suffocating siege, which, I mean, even the UN, big human rights groups, they've all condemned it, right?
Right, and it's impossible to overstate how much of an impact it has.
Yeah.
You're talking about restricting movement, essential goods, everything. It's a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, even when we talk about Lebanon right now, you can't separate that from what's happening in Gaza. It's all connected.
It's like this pressure cooker situation, just keeps building and building.
Yeah.
And honestly, it kind of feels like Barghouti's saying the U.S. is just tossing more fuel on the fire. He says we're complicit, which is a strong word, and then he drops this number, right? $17.9 billion. That's what he says the U.S. spent on weapons for Israel just, the last few years? And even crazier, he's saying just this past August, the Biden administration, they approved another $20 billion.
I mean, think about that for a sec. $20 billion. That's like more than some whole countries even make in a year. It's massive.
Right.
And it kind of shows you how deeply the U.S. is involved in this whole thing.
Yeah.
Not simple at all.
No, not at all. And it makes you wonder, right, what are we even aiming for with all that aid? Is it to, keep things stable over there, support an ally? Or is it something else entirely? I don't know. It's messy.
Total mess. And Barghouti, he uses that to kind of shift gears to what's happening here in the U.S., right? He's saying most Americans actually don't want this much support for Israel. Even throws in some polls saying people want a ceasefire, less involvement from us.
Which, I mean, it makes you think, how much should public opinion matter in these situations?
Yeah.
It's international, complex.
Oh, for sure. It's like on one side, you got what the people want, right? Maybe they're thinking peace, not getting bogged down in another conflict. But then you've got the government, and they're trying to balance that with long-term goals, who our allies are, all that. Sometimes those clash. That's what makes foreign policy such a headache.
Yeah, no kidding. And speaking of headaches, it's kind of wild that Barghouti brings up how different Biden and Harris's responses have been, right?
Totally. He's pointed these polls saying people want de-escalation, and then bam, he quotes Harris pledging rock solid support for Israel. Whether that means they're ignoring what people want or it's just how messy things are, who knows? But it's there.
It's definitely there. And of course, we can't talk about this conflict without the whole what if things get even worse angle, right? And Barghouti, he's not shying away from that at all, especially when he brings up Iran.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. He's basically implying that Netanyahu and his government, they're trying to use this whole thing to drag the U.S. into a war with Iran for them.
And if you zoom out for a second, we're not just talking about another regional conflict anymore. Iran, that's global impact right there. Oil, other countries getting involved, not good.
Not good at all. Like opening up a whole other can of worms, way more dangerous. And Barghouti, I think he's trying to warn us about that.
Yeah, like, hey, this could blow up way bigger than you think. He even digs up that old quote from Trump back when he was in office, saying if he got reelected, the U.S. and Israel would be tighter than ever, which, I mean...
Not exactly the way to cool things down.
Not even a little bit. And it just shows you how differently every leader sees this whole thing. Trump's whole deal, especially in the Middle East, was all about being buddies with Israel. Tough on Iran, you know?
Two totally different game plans. Makes you wonder how different things would be now, depending on who's in charge, you know?
Absolutely. But with all this back and forth about what the U.S. should do or shouldn't do, what about the people stuck right in the middle of it, right? What's Barghouti actually saying we should be doing for the Palestinians?
And this is where Barghouti gets kind of, I don't know, inspiring. Like, he's not just complaining about the U.S., he's talking directly to Americans, you know? Almost like he's saying, hey, the government might be stuck in this mess, but you guys, you've got a voice, use it.
Right. He gets pretty fired up about it, too. Like, I remember this one part, he's like, if there's going to be peace, it's got to come from Americans demanding change. Pretty much puts it all on us, you know?
And he ties it back to all that classic American stuff, too, right? Equality, justice, freedom, all that. Smart move, really. Makes Americans think, hey, we believe in this stuff, but are we living up to it over there?
Right, right. But he's not pretending things are rosy over in Palestine either.
Right.
Talks about how hopeless it feels for a lot of people. How can you even think about freedom when you're just trying to survive day to day, you know?
It's like he's bringing it back down to earth, reminding everyone there are real people dealing with this, not just some political game, you know what I mean? They're living with this fear all the time.
Heavy stuff. And yet he ends on this. I don't know if it's optimistic, but there's a little hope there, right? He says more and more people around the world are waking up to what's going on in Palestine. Like, maybe, just maybe, that can actually make a difference.
For sure. Like, yeah, things look bad, but if we can change the conversation, put enough pressure on governments, that's how things change, right?
Yeah. Got to start somewhere. And then he has that line about the moral arc of the universe, bending towards justice. But then, and I thought this was key, he says, it doesn't bend on its own.
Whoa. Yeah, he's not letting us off the hook. He's saying justice takes work. We got to actually do something, not just wait around for it to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Even if it feels impossible.
So, okay, here we are. We've gone through Barghouti's take on the history, the human cost, the politics, and now this, like, call to action. What are we doing with all this, right? That's what I'm thinking.
Right. That's the question he's throwing out there. If we want things to be better, what's our part in that? It's easy to feel overwhelmed, like, what can I even do? But even small things, learning about it, talking to people, supporting organizations, those add up. Be part of the solution, you know?
Exactly. Don't just sit there, right? Get in the game. That's a lot to take in.
A lot to think about, that's for sure. And this is just scratching the surface, honestly.
Be real. So, to everyone listening, tell us what you think. Anything in Barghouti's article really hit home for you? What questions you still got? There are no easy answers here, that's for sure. But if we can talk about it, really wrestle with it, maybe that's a start, right? Thanks for diving into this with us.